Hi, my name is Keithan Mer Patel. I'm the Director of Undergraduate Studies for Computer Science, and welcome to the Transfer Student Orientation for the Department of Computer Science. Let me just start the presentation real quick. All right, so I've already introduced myself. What this session will cover is basically some important information about the major, given in particular to transfer students and some of the concerns that transfer students often have in terms of getting started with the major and finishing the major on time. So we'll go over our degree programs and how they're structured, how you should look at getting started in the major. And then we'll cover some general stuff that's applicable to all students, things like research opportunities for undergraduates, internship resources, various things about life in the department, and then finally, some contact information for who you can contact to get more information about various things that are going on in the department. Okay, so just to give a kind of an overview of our degree programs, we have two main degree programs in computer science. We have the Bachelor of Science. That's our main degree program where we have 70% of our majors, and then we have a Bachelor of Arts. And the Bachelor of Arts is a streamlined version of the major, so it requires fewer overall classes. And when we get into the details, you'll see that in reality, the amount of computer science you take is pretty much the same between the two. It really has to do with the classes outside the department, supporting classes in math and science. That is the difference in the degree. We also have a minor, a 5-course minor, and some special programs. We have a streamlined application process to our graduate program that we bill as a BS-MS program, which can be done as quickly as 5 years if things line up correctly, or but there's no specific amount of time that you need to complete your master's, but we do have a way to go from the BS to the MS in a kind of expedited fashion. And the one thing to note here is that we have recently redesigned our major. So you might come across old information that we're still rooting out of our website or from the course catalog, so that it might not exactly match the current reality, but here we're going to go over the new program, and hopefully we'll get rid of any false information that's out there. We've rooted out most of it, but hopefully we'll get rid of all of it later. But basically, the big difference is that our introductory course sequence for all our degree programs have been recently redesigned, and these new definitions are in effect starting fall 2020. And I'll talk about how to tell whether or not you're looking at the old requirements or the new requirements in a little bit. Okay, so the core requirements for the Bachelor of Science, so this is kind of the Bachelor of Science, the definition of the Bachelor of Science major. The core requirements are Comp 283 or Math 381. So Math 381, the title of it is Discrete Mathematics. We teach a version of discrete mathematics for computer science. It's a little bit more focused on computer science topics, called Comp 283, Discrete Structures. And while you can take either one, we do prefer that our students take Comp 283 if they can, but really either one will be fine. Then there's the introductory sequence, which, like I said, has been newly redesigned. And so these course numbers don't match the course numbers we used to use. So they're completely new starting this semester. And so that sequence is Comp 210, Comp 211, Comp 301, and Comp 311. And I'll talk about how those fit together in a little bit. Then there are 2 upper division courses that are required of all of our BS students, Comp 455 and Comp 550. And then then you complete the major by taking 5 additional computer science courses in the upper division, where for us that means a number greater than or equal to 420. Now, these 5 elective courses that you do to complete your major exclude a lot of or most of our learning contract-based courses. So these are things like independent study or internships. And again, I'll talk about that in a little bit. So that's the core requirements of things that you need to take within the department. In the support of those core requirements for the Bachelor of Science, you also have to take the 3-semester calculus sequence, Math 231, Math 232, Math 233. Also linear algebra, which I believe is in the process of being renumbered. I'm not sure if that renumbering is going to be in effect in the fall or not, but it was called Math 547, and I think it's going to be called Math 347 soon. Then a 400 level statistics course, probability and statistics, STOR 435. And then physics, either 116 or 118. So physics used to start their physics sequence with 116. Now they start with 118, but we still list 116 because a lot of transfer students in particular come in with physics 116 credit. And then finally, a second lab science. And so this can be from a number of different choices, including Astro 101, 101L, Bio 101, 101L, Chem 205, Chem 101, et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole list of them. But basically, a second lab science. Now, if we look at the Bachelor of Arts, much of the course sequence is the same, except the thing that's going to be different are the things that you take outside the department. So the core requirements, again, include Comp 283 or Math 381, basically discrete structures or discrete math. The same intro sequence, Comp 210, 211, 301, and 311. And now 6 additional courses that are from the upper division. So whereas the BS require 2 specific upper division courses and then ask for 5 more for a total of 7 upper division comp courses, the BA is a little bit more flexible. It's 1 fewer course overall, 6 versus 7, and there's no prescription. So while we do certainly encourage our BAs to take Comp 455 and Comp 550, it's not required. And an additional bit of flexibility includes that with the BA, you can take 2 of these courses. The upper division elective courses can come from other departments where we have identified a list of specific courses that you could take to satisfy this requirement. And up to 2 can come from these outside the department courses. The big difference, again, is in the not so much with what you take within the department, but what you take outside of the department. So instead of the 3-semester calculus sequence, you only need 1 semester of calculus, Math 231. Instead of the 400-level statistics class, you can take either STOR 155 or Psych 210, which are lower-level statistics courses that can satisfy that requirement. So that brings up the question, why do people choose the BA over the BS? In general, people choose the BA often because of that increased flexibility and that streamlined degree requirements. So there are many fewer required courses overall. There's greater flexibility. Like I said, there's the more course choice, and there's also choices outside the department that can be integrated into your program of study. And so the BA can be easier to complete in a shorter amount of time or be paired with a second major more easily because of that increased flexibility. So transfer students often will choose the BA because of that increased flexibility and the ability to finish the degree a little bit quicker. But in reality, outside in the real world, as our students have gone off and graduated and gone off to jobs, we've seen very little difference in how our BA students and our BS students fare in the rest of the world, right? So outside the once you leave, right? So really the BA isn't much of there's no real difference in outcomes in terms of the kinds of job opportunities you get or the kinds of internships you get. So really the BA can be is often is just as good a degree program as our BS for all practical purposes. So, right, just to kind of go over the difference, very little difference within the department, the same introductory sequence. The only real difference is that where the BS requires 7 upper division courses, 2 of which have to be 455 and 550. The BA requires 6 total upper division electives, and 455 and 550, while highly recommended, are not necessarily required. And you have the additional flexibility of taking some courses outside the department that we have already maintained a list of courses that are been allowed to count. And we actually maintain 2 lists. We maintain a list of courses that are not allowed to count and a list of courses that are allowed to count. And we have a web page where you can see which courses count or don't count. And then if there's a course that you think might be able to count that is not on either list, there's a way to submit a request for it to be formally evaluated for either being on one list or the other. Right. So, and like I said, we have seen very little difference in postgraduate outcomes in terms of industry. Course selection and grades matter a lot more than whether the degree says BA or BS. One specific spot or place in which you might want to make sure you have the BS rather than the BA is if you're interested in applying to a computer science graduate school. Not so much that the graduate schools require a BS, it's just that the graduate schools often require a lot of background material, a lot of background knowledge in math and science, which is covered by the BS that is not covered by the BA. So, so that's one possible area in which you might prefer the BS over the BA. Otherwise, it really is your choice. If you already have taken a lot of that extra math and science, and you might as well just complete the BS. Otherwise, if you have some reason that you need the extra flexibility, or the BA will fit your program of study and the time you have left in a better, then the BA is a perfectly reasonable choice. So getting started in the major, if you've never taken a programming course or calculus, where you want to start is taking Comp 110, which is technically not part of our major, but is a prerequisite for our first class that is part of our major. Well, that's Comp 210. And so if you've never taken a programming course, Comp 110 is the course that you want to start with. Comp 110 requires, as a co-requisite, calculus, math 231, and so you can take that at the same time if you have not already taken calculus. Now, generally, most transfer students will have taken at least one programming course and or calculus, in which case you should start at Comp 210. So if you have taken at least one programming course in calculus, you can get Comp 110 credit either as transfer credit in the normal transfer credit evaluation procedure that the general advising councils will go over, or starting this summer, and although I don't have the details right now because we're still figuring it out, we are going to be providing a placement exam for both Comp 110 and Comp 210. And so you can get placement credit for Comp 110 and even Comp 210 if you've taken enough computer science at your prior institution. So, if you have already taken programming, then that's how we suggest you start, by getting Comp 110 credit, either by transfer credit or by sitting for the placement exam. And then starting with Comp 283 or Math 381, which is discrete math, and discrete structures, discrete math, and Comp 210, which is our first course required for the major in our intro sequence. Technically, it's data structures is the title of that course, but Comp 210 is where that starts. Now, if you've taken more than one programming course in calculus, if you've already taken data structures at your prior institution and you've gotten past calculus, then you can actually get credit for both Comp 110 and Comp 210 by examination. If you've already taken discrete math, you might be able to get transfer credit for discrete math. Now that is determined by the math department, not by us, but you could possibly get transfer credit for that aspect of things as well. If not, then we can certainly allow you to start with the third course in our intro sequence, Comp 211, but you will certainly need to take Comp 283 or Math 381 if you haven't already. Now, less important to get started, but still possible, is Comp 301, which is a third part of our intro sequence. Although you can take Comp 211 or Comp 301 after you're past Comp 210, you really want to get started on Comp 211 as soon as possible, and we'll see why in a second. All right, so like I said, we are going to have Comp 110 and Comp 210 placement exams available. So these are currently under development. We're going to offer them regularly every semester and during the summer. So this is the first time we're offering them. So this is why we don't have all of the details. We are sure that we'll have it available by mid-July or maybe even a little earlier in time for this semester. It's going to be online, and we have a web page listed here where we'll post the details. Right now, that link is just a placeholder and just says details are coming. So there's not a lot of information there now, although if you go to that web page, you can see that there is a place for you to fill out a form to be informed by when details are available. So if you fill out this form, we'll get back to you about when the exam is available. Right, going back to the presentation now. Sorry. All right, so you can take both the Comp 110 exam and the Comp 210 exam, or just the Comp 110 exam. There'll be separate exams. There's no penalty for trying to take the placement exam and not getting the credit. In fact, the idea of the placement exam is to make sure you start at the appropriate place. Now, coding questions will either be in Java or asked in terms of pseudocode or some sort of language that we define for you and kind of explain. And so, again, the details of this are still being decided. And so, we'll definitely have material on that webpage for what the exam will cover and in what languages or in how the coding questions will be expressed. The Comp 110 exam will obviously be just the basic programming concepts. This is kind of intended to your first programming course where nothing terribly fancy, not object-oriented programming or anything like that, but just normal variables, functions, recursion, conditionals, loops, arrays. So if any of these words are not familiar, then probably not, right? You should start with Comp 110. And then Comp 210 is our data structures course. And so here it's a little bit more formal, array base and link to lists, abstract data types, big O analysis, trees, graphs, graph algorithms, these are standard topics for a data structures course that you would find at almost any institution. So if you've taken data structure somewhere else, these topic lists should be reasonably familiar. Right, so transfer credit. Transfer credit is a process that is managed by the college. The first step, of course, is to get your credits accepted as transfer credits, and then once they are accepted, you can submit for a reevaluation request for our department to assess the specific equivalents to specific UNC courses. For our department, Professor David Stotz is in charge of this approval process, and I have his contact information at the end. And when you're making these reevaluation requests, it's helpful to include as much supporting material as you can manage to submit, right? So in addition to the syllabus, if you have any sample assignments or quizzes or exams, anything that you can give to Professor Stotz in order to help him evaluate the course you did take is definitely very helpful. Okay, so I just here is the major kind of laid out. This is shows us the BS. We're going to see a more complete version of this graphic in a few slides, but basically this kind of shows for the BS, right? So this is showing the BS version of the major, how things are related. So over here on this side here, we have Math 231 and Comp 110. These are, this dashed line here indicates that this is a possible co-requisite. You can take these at the same semester. And then the official, so Comp 110, while not officially part of the major, is a prerequisite for the actual intro sequence that is part of the major, which starts at Comp 210. So we have Comp 210, which is a prerequisite for both Comp 211 and Comp 301. Comp 211 is a prerequisite for Comp 311. I'm going to have course titles on the more complete graphic later, so you can kind of see what the different topics are here. But basically, this represents our intro sequence. And we can see through the prereq requirements that you have to take Comp 210 before you can take either Comp 211 or 301, and you have to take Comp 211 before you can take Comp 311. Comp 311 is kind of important because this really is the gateway to the major. So our major is oversubscribed. In other words, we have too many students wanting to be computer science majors than we can as a department handle. This was actually starting to become a bit of an issue in the last couple of years, and so we started to look at ways in which to limit how many majors or limit the number of people majoring in computer science to match how many people we could teach in the major. While we considered an admissions procedure, and so you may have heard some rumor or some past information about how there's going to be some sort of admissions procedure to computer science, we've actually managed to find a way to not have to do an admissions procedure per se. But the key, there's two aspects to our solution that will affect, in particular, transfer students. And so these are something that you should be aware of. One thing that we're doing is essentially we're limiting how many upper division courses a student is allowed to register in any given semester. What this helps us do is it smooths out everyone's path through the major, lets us match our resources for the number of students that we actually have, and to know that we have enough seats in the upper division in order to accommodate the number of majors that we have, and it prevents students from essentially like a buffet, like hogging all, like having seniors basically take 4 or 5 computer science electives in their last 2 semesters, leaving not enough seats left for students who need to make more steady progress in their major. So the way this is going to work is we're going to resource our upper division courses according to how many seats we have in Comp 311. So essentially, getting through Comp 311 is the keystone for getting through the major, right? So anybody can declare a computer science major, and we can't prevent you from declaring a computer science major. But the key to actually being able to complete the major is going to be getting a seat in Comp 311 with enough time to complete the major, taking only 2 upper division courses at a time. And we call this the 2 before 3 policy, right? So because the major is heavily oversubscribed, in order to maximize the number of majors we can support given our teaching resources, like I said, we have to limit the number of upper division courses that are taken by students. And so the way we're going to do this starting next semester, starting in fall 2020, is that before registration for the next semester starts, so this is going to come into effect fall 2020 for spring 2021. So, and then this will be in effect from here on forward. But basically the idea here is before registration happens in the normal way, we're going to have some sort of system. Again, we're still in the process of designing and implementing it. We're going to have some sort of system where all declared majors that are past 311 will be given an opportunity to sign up for, register, or express interest in 2 upper division courses before anybody is given an opportunity to register for a 3rd or more upper division courses. So this is going to, again, the idea here is that it helps even out the registration of our upper division courses across all our students in order to prevent some students from taking up more than their fair share. What it will mean is that that even if you have the time, if you have the semesters left, or you have the capability or the wherewithal to take more than 2 upper division courses at a time, we're not, I'm not saying that that won't be possible. It'll just mean that we're going to make sure that everybody gets 2 before anybody gets 3. So it could be the case that that as you get to those upper division courses, you're not necessarily going to be able to take every course that you want to take because of this 2 before 3 policy. But the trade-off is that allows us to support many more majors, and so it avoids having to have some sort of admission procedure, right? So effectively what this means is that it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to rush through the major or to squeeze the major into a really small number of semesters. So we have had in the past students whose plan, right, whose course of, program of study has depended on taking 4 or 5 computer science upper division electives in their last semester or the last 2 semesters. So rushing through the major is not going to be possible anymore. While this is not terribly onerous for students who start at Carolina and can start in the major their freshman and sophomore year, it does mean that transfer students need to be carefully planning to make sure that they can finish the major in the time that they have left. And we do expect that many transfer students will have to take advantage of that 9th or 10th semester that is available from UNC in order to complete the major in light of this policy. So if you're a transfer student who only has 4 semesters left and you were intending to squeeze the entire major into 4 semesters, that may or may not be possible depending on whether you can get 110 or 210 credit, like how far into the intro sequence you can start. And here's where the BA actually comes into play, because the BA does have some more flexibility. Especially with courses outside of the department that will not be subject to this 2 before 3 policy. And because the BA has 1 fewer course overall, the BA could be a significant enabler for being able to finish the major. So you really should take the time to plan out, what semesters you're going to take, or how you're going to complete the major. But keep this in mind that once you're past 311 for that upper division requirements, the department is going to be limiting you to 2 course registrations, and you can't really count on a third. Okay, so here's like the more complete graphic that I talked about. This actually kind of captures both the BS and the BA. So again, these solid gray lines are prerequisites. These dashed lines are co-requisites. That means they can be taken at the same semester. Again, we start off with Math 231 and Comp 110. And hopefully as transfer students, many of you interested in computer science have already taken at least 1 programming course and can get Comp 110 credit, either by transfer credit or by sitting for the placement exam. So like I said, 110 and 210, these are available as by examination credit. And again, you want to start as quickly as possible, right, in order to be able to get through the major in the amount of time you have left. All these courses up here that are in this yellow box, these are the ones that are in fact going to be limited to 2 registrations per semester. And you can see the way we've laid it out here, right? If you think about each of these vertical columns being a semester, we don't ever have more than 2 of these at a time, right? Right, so these Comp 455 and Comp 550, and here I have the actual titles of the courses laid out here. This is Models of Languages and Computation, so it's a theory course that covers finite state machines and finite automata, and then Algorithms Analysis is another foundational theoretical course. Those 2 courses are required for the BS. They're not required for the BA, but they are highly recommended for the BAs, right? Again, 2 of these comp electives could come from other the departments for the BA. And the nice thing about that is those outside the department courses would not be subject to this 2 before 3 policy, right? So that's an exception. The courses in other departments approved for the BA. So those courses could get stacked up and into fewer semesters if necessary. And then while this graphic shows all of the requirements for the BS, do note that the BA has 1 fewer comp elective, so overall has 1 fewer course, right? Now, the key to all of this is Comp 311, right? So, all of these courses that are above here, most of them are going to require Comp 311. Almost all of them will require the prior part of the intro sequence. That's Comp 210, Comp 211, and Comp 301. But a lot of the upper division courses will also require Comp 311. And it's Comp 311 that is going to determine the size of our major, right? So it's how many seats we put in here every semester that essentially determines how many seats in these upper division courses that we create, that we target our resource for, and so getting into and getting through Comp 311 really is the key to the major. So a typical program of study for a transfer student, right? This assumes that you've taken at least 1 programming course and can get in calculus, and so you can get 110 credit and Math 231 credit either as transfer credit or by examination, right? Shows, so we see that for the BS, right? So I have two columns here. I have a BS program of study and a BA program of study. What I haven't shown are courses outside of the department that might also be needed for your general college graduation requirements. I'm just focusing here on just the things for the major. We can see that there is a path through either the BS or the BA. The BS kind of requires 5 semesters. It would be very difficult to get through the BS in fewer than 5 semesters, mostly because once you get to the higher upper division courses, if the 2 before 3 policy is preventing you from getting more than 2 courses, it spreads out that program of study into that 5th semester. And there's really no way to get it compressed. If you really need to finish in 4 semesters, then choosing to do the BA could be a way to do that, because again, you can find an elective outside of the department that counts toward the degree program. And so that allows you to take, for example, here semester 4, you're taking 2 comp electives within the department, and that fits within the 2 before 3 policy, but then you're also taking a 3rd elective outside the department. And so that, which is not a subject to the 2 before 3 policy, which then allows you to actually finish the degree. And then overall, of course, the BA is one fewer course. So if you can start at Comp 210, right? So if you've already taken calculus and Comp 110, you can get credit from Comp 110. Then there's certainly a feasible path through the BS in 5 semesters and a feasible path through the BA in 4 semesters, but both require you to take Comp 311 and get through Comp 311 in that specific semester. Now, if for some reason you're unable to register for Comp 311, like for some, your registration time is really poor, or somehow for some reason you just didn't get a seat in Comp 311, then there's still some possibilities. You can, there might be some comp electives that don't quite require Comp 311 that you could swap out and flip around in terms of which semester you took Comp 311. But there's going to be some point where you absolutely have to get through Comp 311 in order to get through the rest of the major, within the time that you have left. So knowing when that critical semester is for you and working out a target plan as well as a plan B is really important. So Comp 311, like I said, is the key to the major. We are going to teach, or our plan as a department is to try to teach Comp 210, Comp 211, and Comp 301. Those are the other parts of the intro sequence where we want to teach that at what we call interest scale. In other words, we're going to try to make these classes as big as they need to be in order to accommodate as many students are as interested in trying out computer science, right? But Comp 311, that's what really determines the size of our major overall, and that is being taught at resource scale. So the number of seats that we put for Comp 311 basically kind of controls the total number of students we can really get through the major, for the rest of the major. So right now that target is 250 seats per semester. So that means that we can support about 500 majors per year. Current interest in the major is a little bit higher than that. So that means that there's probably going to be students who find themselves wanting to be majors and unable to be majors because they're unable to register for 311. That's what's gonna, without having an admissions procedure, that, getting a seat in 311 is the de facto admissions criteria for being able to complete the major. So you should have a plan B for what happens if you're unable to register for 311. You can try to adjust your plan to accommodate taking Comp 311 the next semester, if that's still possible. Another thing that you might be able to do is to switch to the minor, which only requires, does not require Comp 311, only requires the rest of the intro sequence plus another 2 courses that are in the upper division. And so that's another possible alternative plan, is to switch to the minor. But being able to getting through Comp 311 and getting through Comp 311 in a semester where you have enough semesters left to get through the rest of your degree requirements, That's the key, right? So that's the thing you really need to be, to know what your plan is. In terms of academic expectations, we do require a C or better in that entire course sequence. And in fact, that's what kind of trips students up the most, is that they start off with enough time to complete the major, but then they get a C minus in Comp 301, or they get a C minus in Comp 311, and they have to repeat the course. And if you have to repeat the course, then there might not be enough time left to complete the course and still make it through, right? But so C or better is required in that course sequence. C or better is also required in any course that's a prerequisite. So that means a lot of that, Math 231, Comp 283, any course that acts as a prerequisite for some other course later in the major, you need to get a C or better in. So retaking courses really jeopardizes your ability to complete the major because it delays things. And so that 2 before 3 rule means that trying to complete the major by cramming 4 or 5 courses at the end may not be possible, right? So if you're unable to get a C in one of the intro sequence courses, that's a really strong signal that you need to reconsider whether this major is right for you, and whether you have enough time to actually complete it, right? The other thing about academic expectations that's important to understand is that you really want to take the time to understand your instructor's policies on collaboration. We understand that computer science can be something that you really need to be able to discuss and collaborate with your peers in order to deepen your understanding and to get help. Very rarely in the real world does anyone ever work on a major piece of software on their own, right? That just doesn't happen. So being able to collaborate and communicate with your peers and being able to work together and learn from each other is an important skill. And so we don't want to necessarily tamp that down. But at the same time, there is a line between getting some acceptable help versus crossing the line into an honor code violation. So especially with regard to programming assignments, please be sure to understand exactly where those lines are with respect to your the particular class you're taking and the expectations of your instructors. Feel free to ask if those things are not particularly clear, or if you have a question about whether some form of collaboration or some form of interaction with your peers is crosses that line or not. But that's something we are trying to take seriously. This is not just a problem for us. This is a problem for most computer science departments everywhere, where especially with programming assignments, given the amount of resources that are available on the web, and how easy it is to both cheat as well as to detect cheating, it's kind of it's a real issue for the field. And so we really want to make sure that you have a good understanding of what is and is not acceptable, and to police yourselves in some sense with the true spirit of the honor code. But that is something that we do take seriously. So do take the time to understand what is within what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. All right, so that's kind of the major as the nuts and bolts of the major. In terms of kind of other extracurricular non-requirement opportunities, one thing that our undergraduate population does a lot of is undergraduate research, and that comes in a couple of different forms. The most common way our undergraduates do undergraduate research is as a Comp 495 credit course. So this is mentored research for credit. So you get 3 credits for it. It's graded. These are individual projects that are advised by faculty members. So in other words, you work out with a faculty member exactly what the scope of the project is and what your expectations are. It can be part of some larger integrated research program. In other words, you could have a faculty member who has a large graduate research group or a large research program, and then that these individual projects might fit into that larger research program in some way. And that also, of course, might involve a collaboration with other students. Now, one thing that we've recently changed policy-wise, but has not made it into the official definition of the major, but something certainly to keep in mind is that you can do a Comp 495 project, you can do a mentored research project, and have it count as a comp elective toward the major. So that used to not be the case. So if you look at the official definition of the major, it's going to say that Comp 495 doesn't count for the major. We've recently changed that. It's going to take a while for the bulletin to catch up because these things only get updated once a year, and then it takes a while for it to actually kind of propagate through the system, but we're allowing that right now, right? So we're grandfathering that in by manually allowing this to occur. So so you can take Comp 495, you can do mentored research and have one instance of Comp 495 count toward your major, count toward that upper division elective credit. Because, and this would not count as part of the 2 before 3 policy. So this is another way in which you can, if you need to, try to get through more of the requirements in a shorter period of time. Because if you're able to set up a Comp 495 project, then that's one course, and then you could still take 2 more upper division courses, and there that will allow you to take 3 upper division courses that count toward the major in a given semester. So Comp 495 is the way most of our students will often engage in research. If you want to do an honors thesis, we do have an honors thesis option to the degree program. So this is a 2-course sequence that you have to take, Comp 691H and Comp 692H. And so these are for projects that are a little bit more ambitious, a little larger. It requires a formal written thesis, a public presentation of the work, a committee that includes both the faculty advisor for the research as well as a second faculty second faculty member as a second reader. And so it's a little bit more formal, a little bit more involved. And there are some GPA requirements as well in terms of being able to be eligible to do an honors thesis. But if that's of interest, then you can certainly, that's another way that some of our students engage in research is by doing an honors thesis. Internships and internship for credits. Almost all of our students will do at least one internship, usually a summer internship, sometimes during the year. Sometimes they'll do 2, like between junior and senior year, or sophomore and junior year, and junior and senior year. But in any case, we actually have a lot of support for internships within the department. In particular, we have a department career development coordinator that is above and beyond what you'll have access to at career services. So this is somebody who's entirely focused on computer science students. Her name is Stephanie Johnson, and her contact is here. We also have a majors email list that's automatically created from a list of declared majors, and we distribute any internship opportunities and job announcements and other kinds of information that's applicable to our majors through that email list. If you want to do an internship and get credit for it, we have a course called Comp 293. It does count for EE credit, so for experiential education, general education requirement, and it's 3 credits. Also, it's graded, but Comp 293 does not count toward the major for as an upper division course elective, but because it has that EE tag, students sometimes would like to get Comp 293 credit for the internship they're taking. However, it needs to be set up before the internship begins, and the Comp 293 credits have to be taken while the internship occurs. So if this is for a summer internship, for example, then you'd be signing up for Comp 293 during summer session. In that case, you'll have to pay for the Comp 293 credits as a summer course, essentially. If you happen to have an internship that's also going through the year, like you're working part-time as part of an internship, as well as going to school, then you can take Comp 293 during the academic year. Again, both of these things need to be set up before the internship begins and cannot be repeated for credit. So you can only take it once. But there's a form to fill out, right? It's a learning contract like our other learning contract courses, and so you can you basically provide information about what the internship entails. We need a contact, a supervising contact in the company that you're working for, wherever the internship is happening, where so that we can confirm with them the nature of the internship, a couple of weeks into it, as well as at the very end when you've completed it, to make sure you successfully completed it. You do have to write up a small little paper. Like, it doesn't have to be much, but we do require you to write up a formal description of your experience, kind of like basically what I did over the summer, and what you learned, and what tools you use, what technology you use, what basically a reflection on the internship experience, etc. And that's the formal kind of artifact that you'll submit at the end of the internship experience in order to get your Comp 293 grade. We have a number of other miscellaneous activities that go on in the department. There are a lot of clubs in our department. Our students are very engaged in department life. The department does a lot to try to support our students' interests. And so I'm not going to list them all here, but there is definitely a lot of student-run clubs that are all student organized and led. And so those also provide some leadership opportunities where you can get involved. A few that are particularly big events each year are the UNC Hackathon in the fall. There's a big committee of students that help organize it. And it's always a really great event. Hundreds of interested students from all over, the Mid-Atlantic region, from all kinds of different universities come, and they spend an entire weekend basically hacking 24 hours a day. And then there's some prizes at the end, and often with some sponsored prizes from businesses and that kind of thing. And so it's a lot of fun. Similarly, in the spring, there's another hackathon called Pearl Hacks, which is intended for the target audience for the attendees for Pearl Hacks are women and non-binary gender individuals and beginners in computer science. And so there's a whole hackathon that's got a different focus in terms of its target audience. Again, it's a big event that gets we have a big committee of students that get together and put on that event. And so that's another place where you can get involved. We also, the department hosts something called Maze Day every year, where we have lots and lots of student volunteers that are needed in order to put on this event. This is actually a outgrowth of a research direction of one of our professors, Professor Gary Bishop, who does a lot of research in assistive technologies for the visually impaired. And so Maze Day we'll have visually impaired students, mostly middle school and high school students from many states away. They all kind of come to the department to see the latest and greatest research on visually impaired assistive technologies. And so we have a large student volunteer group that helps put on Maze Day, and that's another thing you can get involved in. And like I said, we have lots of clubs. The esports club is one of the largest on campus, and one of the most active. We have a data science focused club. There are clubs focused on all kinds of different topic areas, or group based. So there's there'll be announcements and signs and flyers and lots of different ways to kind of get engaged into all those clubs. And you can start your own, right? And so that's certainly something that we encourage our students to take the initiative for. Almost all of these clubs are things that were, some student had an idea that they really wanted to pursue, and they, and to whatever extent that we can, we try to foster a culture of student-led initiatives. There are other ways to get involved in the department. Like I said, there's usually several department events that we need volunteers for, so there's volunteer opportunities. We also have students who sit on a lot of key committees that help run the department. And this is actually somewhat unique. Not a lot of departments do this. So for example, the undergraduate curriculum committee always has 2 student members. It helps us get the student perspective in the room and to make sure that we're connecting with our student body. Another way that students engage in the department, and this is actually a very large program, is undergraduate learning assistantships. So just like you might have a TA, a teaching assistant, who is a graduate student, we call undergraduates who are helping run a course, we call them LAs, in order to make a distinction between graduate students and undergraduate students. But we use undergraduate LAs heavily, especially in our intro sequence courses. Now the Students who act as LAs have reported that it's a really great way for them to better understand and deepen their understanding of material, because when you have to help teach it, it really helps you understand it yourself. Our students find it a very rewarding experience. And like I said, we use LAs in all our intro sequence courses. In fact, we don't even use graduate student TAs in our intro sequence anymore. We only use LAs. But we also have LA opportunities in the upper division courses, so it's mostly juniors and seniors that are past the intro sequence or past certain upper division courses that then come back and act as LAs for later when they're juniors and seniors. We do pay for our LAs. Currently I think the rate is $2,000 per semester, right? That's the paid rate. But a lot of our LAs also do it for credit. We actually have a course called Comp 227. It's not part of the major, but it's called, it's effective peer teaching in computer science. So that is a course that you can take in order to learn about the latest and greatest, state of the art in computer science education. So we'll go over things like goal motivation theory, active learning techniques, implicit bias training, etc. And so you'll learn a lot of pedagogy, and then and that meets once a week. And then there's a 10-hour per week practicum associated with that course, where you are acting as an LA for one of the intro courses. And then people who have taken Comp 227 are often preferentially, picked for, other LA opportunities later. So it acts as a bit of a training course for our LA. So doing well, doing the LA experience as part of Comp 227 and doing well in Comp 227 then kind of opens the door for being in LA in other courses later. So that's actually a really big deal for our department. We really are proud of our LA program and how involved it makes our students in kind of a peer teaching opportunities, and providing an opportunity to get involved in the department in ways outside of the classroom. And so that's something you can look forward to. Right. So just to wrap up, we do have the department website is actually a good resource for all of this information, and while, like I said, because we're in this transitional period from the old sequence number to the new sequence number and the newly designed major, there might be some places where the information doesn't quite match up. For the most part, I believe we've done a reasonably good job of explaining things on the department website, and updating that information to now reflect the new reality. And so I highly encourage you to go there in order to see what resources are available there, and that where all this information is there. Now we have two student service managers that do great work, Tanja Austin and Denise Kenny, and so they are often the people that you will deal with directly in order to get something to happen, like like some sort of adjustment or some sort of registration action or something like that. And so they're very nice, and but do be respectful of their time and effort, because they're dealing with a lot of different students. Any questions about transfer credits and trying to get a transfer a credit evaluated for a specific course equivalency, you should direct those to Professor Stotz. Like I said, career development, Stephanie Johnson is our main contact there. She is our career development specialist. Professor Don Porter is the one who oversees all of our undergraduate research efforts. So this is Comp 495 and Comp 691H and 692H. Comp 293, which is the internship for credit, that is overseen by Professor Shahriyar Nirjan. And then generally, any advising questions that you might have, we do have a set of faculty members that act as faculty advisors, and you can get to all of us at advising@cs.unc.edu. And just to kind of show you the department website a little bit, kind of looks like this. And just to kind of demonstrate where some of this material is. So this is our overall department website. If you go to academics and then undergraduate programs, this is all of the undergraduate program information. So this is kind of like, if you get to that page, then everything I've talked about, one way or the other, is going to be off of this page, right? So we have a guide to fall 2020 registration. Often we'll post a form for waitlists or for otherwise expressing interest in courses that you weren't able to register for, so that we know where the demand is or where the unmet demand is. We have a link here to that page talking about the examination placement credits. The information about the new introductory sequence is available here as well. This on the side panel, we'll have, like, for example, the official Bachelor of Science degree requirements. The problem is that the official degree requirements, as published in the bulletin, still show the old numbers. So if you see things like Comp 401 or Comp 410, that means that you're looking at old information. And so wherever that is a problem, we've tried to highlight the fact that, hey, yes, that information will be updated soon, but because it takes time for the bulletin to officially change, here is the, what it's going to be. And so all of our web pages hopefully make it clear when, where old information might still be unfortunately still out there, and kind of point you to the new information that you need. All those learning contract courses, there's a page about learning contracts. So this is like Comp 293 is a learning contract course. Comp 495 is a learning contract course, 691 and H, right? So all of these independent studies, like, these are all these special courses that all require a learning contract. So they're all the rules and policies and procedures are all described here, along with a site for where to submit the paperwork and how to get that all started. Other than that, there's a frequently asked questions page that we're constantly updating in order to try to give you to answer some frequently asked questions. But on the advising page, undergraduate advising, right here, you'll see the of course, advise@cs.unc.edu. That's our main advising address. These are the names of our faculty that act as advisors, right? So there's Professor Bishop, myself, Professor Singh, Professor Snoy, Professor Stotz. Now, in the summer, we don't often hold a lot of advising hours, and so it's usually just me by appointment. But otherwise, we'll have an advising calendar for showing when everyone's hours, advising hours are. Some people do it by appointment, some people do it by drop-in. If it is by appointment, then you can click on the bottom here. You can click to get to the appointment slots in order to sign up for an appointment. But often your best bet is to first just send your question to advise@cs.unc.edu. It might be something very easy for us to give you the appropriate information by email. So I would always start there. And then if it turns out that you have more to talk about, or you want to talk about it in more depth, then email would be appropriate for. Then you can kind of sign up for an advising slot or find out when advising hours are for a particular advisor. Right, so that's pretty much my presentation here. Like I said, feel free to send email to advise@cs.unc.edu for anything that might not be clear, or any specific questions you might have about your specific situation, and we'll try to point you into the right direction. All right, thanks for getting through the presentation, and hope to see you on campus, and welcome to Chapel Hill.